Okay, well, this is very exciting. You guys are in for a treat. You have no idea. So to get this discussion going, we all agreed that we wanted to ground this discussion in the pillars of trust and cultural competency, which are both really essential for us as scientists to effectively integrate these communities that we have not done a great job at integrating. So who better to start us off than our resident voice of the patient, who told us, who implored us about the value of these pillars. I want to introduce Teresa Wright-Johnson, a patient advocate, a multiple sclerosis warrior, an inspirational speaker, author, consultant, poet, and general amazing human being who is deeply committed to racial and social justice in healthcare. She is the voice that all of us need to hear, and so we're very lucky to have her here with us today. Teresa, can you tell us about your perspective on these issues as a patient and what messages you have for us in the research community about why we need to focus on trust and cultural competency?
Absolutely. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Raeka, and the entire NYSCF family for having me here today. I consider it an honor, and I don't take it lightly. And I want you all to know that I stand on the shoulders of many. And my position here is to not only bring the patient perspective across, but to let everybody know that we have an obligation. The obligation is ours to humanize medicine and to humanize research. So to your point, Raeka, I'm here and I think the work lies in humanizing the science. We have to realize that it's the stories of the people who we're studying that really make the difference. We have to understand that we have an obligation to not only act in trust and autonomy, but that we are really responsible for each other and for the entire medical landscape. So I'm not sure if I answered the entire question, but that's just a preview of what my work is. Cultural competency is 100% a necessity. You really have to understand who you're studying for best health outcomes. And you really, really, really have to have an allegiance to not only who you're studying, but the person as a whole. So I'll start there and I will finish as the panel continues. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Our next panelist that I'd like to introduce is Krystal Tsosie. She is an indigenous geneticist, bioethicist, and an assistant professor in the School of Life Sciences at Arizona State University. She's a member of many prominent committees on policies, ethics, community engagement, and the importance of indigenous data sovereignty is one of the aspects that you focused on. So as a genetics researcher, a bioethicist, and a member of the indigenous community, you bring such a unique perspective, understanding the value of minoritized communities participating in research, the very justifiable reasons that they are hesitant to do so, and what scientists could be doing better. Can you talk about how you confront this work and what cultural and ethical competencies we are missing when it comes to including minoritized populations in research?
Thank you. For the kind welcome and also for allowing me the opportunity to speak to such an esteemed crowd today. I think one of the problems with DEI work or JEDI or whatever acronym you want to choose is that consistently biomedicine and research is always concentrated on how do we get diverse and underrepresented members in research. And that question, that aim, when you think about it, is so creepy. I'm just going to say it. And actually, when we just focus on needing to include more people in data sets that are representative of different communities, it sounds so much like previously lambasted genome diversity projects that we've had. And unfortunately, we treat equity as a synonym for these other two terms. And that is inappropriate. And that is never going to get us to the aim of actually like moving us towards justice to address these questions related to violation of trust and informed consent and all of these other situations and scenarios that we need to just break the cycle of. Because I can tell you that unfortunately, I come from an institution, the Arizona State University, that was mired in a landmark lawsuit related to violations of trust and informed consent for the collection and use of indigenous peoples' samples, and relating to broad consent models. We had for a very long part of our fields in omics research is just, asking people to contribute their samples and their data and research, and then have a blanket statement of, oh, you also allow us to use this for any other research that benefits research or humankind. And then turn around and use those samples for things that the community never consented to or agreed to begin with. And we never ask whether or not the communities are benefiting proximally from that research, or whether or not we've developed trust partnerships to warrant that use in other contexts. And we've been able to advance the conversations of consent. We've been able to advance dynamic consent platforms. We've been able to advance machine learning approaches related to blockchaining and federated learning approaches, but we don't integrate that. We went into the big data movement, and now where we are now with collectivizing data across not only biomedical research repositories, but in public health repositories, and also clinical spaces. And we have defaulted back to those broad informed consent models without asking ourselves, how can we do better, and how can we ensure that the technology that we've incorporated in other spaces is incorporated in a space that allow community members and communities to have more consent in the process as well, and in the process of data governance. And we've moved really quickly into open data sharing of everything, not even pausing to wonder, are we just going to set ourselves up for failure, for replicating the same errors that we've seen in the past? How are we going to talk about indigenous data sovereignty or data sovereignty, or the right for communities to operationalize their own data decision-making authority when we can't even do that at a domestic level? Notwithstanding not having, thinking about questions of how this is going to relate to intellectual property laws, rules, trademarking, copywriting at the international space. So we have a lot to reckon with and a lot to trust. And we also have to understand that communities are doing this as well for themselves, and in many ways, unfortunately, better than institutions that have been established in the space. I co-founded a nonprofit called the Native Biodata Consortium, which is indigenous-led. With community members and scientists, we brought high-throughput sequencing to a rural tribal community for the first time. We're talking about omics research that looks at social and structural determinants of health along with biological factors in health. And it's who better than to partner with communities themselves for informing these questions that impact their health than them. Certainly not an outsider. And there has to be a lot of humility in this space, because I've done this without a PhD for a large portion of my research career. And now I'm on the other side of the space, and I have to just when I talk to an elder, I have to acknowledge that sometimes they are the experts in this space and not me. And I encourage everyone to do the same as well. Just approach communities with humility, openness, and without over-promising on, I don't know, something related to precision medicine and omics that we cannot deliver on. That's how we build trust moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, very well said, Krystal. I thank both of you for raising these really valuable perspectives that we don't hear enough in the scientific community, and that's just, it's so valuable. So, to continue on this thread of trust, obviously we've all alluded to it, there's really a long history of exploitation and abuse of minoritized communities by the medical and research communities. How do we build back the trust that, that we have lost? What are some ways that we can do that? And I open that up to anyone on the panel who wants to chime in.
Sure, I'll start. Krystal just spoke so eloquently and said it. First, you build trust through authenticity. You make it known what your intention is, and you follow through with that. I know for me, the person who represents, I've been a patient my entire life. I was born with a heart defect, and I didn't fall into this space of advocacy and this space of teaching. I was born for this. So how do I build communities, and how do I tell individuals and instruct others to build trust amongst communities? First, again, by authenticity. Second, by knowing that community that you are trying to serve, by humanizing your work, by telling these communities and showing these communities that you are more than what you say, that you're willing to go the distance. Those things are important, and nothing can be done without trust. And the third, and I think most important part, is just to acknowledge a person's history and the things that they've gone through in the past. We cannot deny the medical mistrust and the trauma that so many communities have endured on our own grounds, on US soil. So it doesn't mean that you have to be responsible for the things that occurred, but you have to acknowledge it in order for us to truly move forward and not repeat the mistakes of the past.
I didn't want to get emotional during this panel. Okay, Krystal, did you want to chime in?
Sure. I think one challenge is that when we get into our myopic space, we don't understand what it means to actually ameliorate health disparities, what is entailed in the process. In terms of over-promising things that we cannot deliver, there have been many instances where cell lines have been taken from Indigenous peoples with the exchange of delivering therapeutics to cure the conditions that are afflicting them. And then, those communities have unfortunately come back and have stated that they felt duped and exploited because they have heard that other people are benefiting first from the use of their cells before they are. And this is now 20 years later, several decades in many cases, where these cell lines have been taken from our communities and our members without actual proximal gain. And there is something to be stated about terminology and the terms that we throw around quite a bit in terms of democratization. Like, we're going to democratize our field by making these tests available, to making the technologies available. And I just question that term, democracy, democratizing. Like, what system of democracy are we talking about here? Because the last two elections in the US space really don't encourage
Hopefully
any
not
confidence.
the Electoral College.
But even the Haudenosaunee democracy, like, all of these spaces are about benefiting most or majority rules. And those instances, it's going to continue to disenfranchise small underrepresented communities. And we also have to question the pace of innovation, and also the fact that what constitutes innovation in biomedicine is also going to continue to disenfranchise us. When we started our organization, MBDC, and the About Data Consortium in 2018, and we had our soft launch at the American Society of Human Genetics, at that same meeting, we had, unsurprisingly, a number of drug partners ask us, how many? What's your sample power? What phenotypes of interest do you have? And really asking for access to the data sets. And we basically pushed back and asked, why don't you study conditions that specifically impact Indigenous peoples? And we had a whole list ready of early childhood conditions and metabolic disorders. And we asked, why can't we use Indigenous peoples' DNA to study the things that impact us? And they basically told us, you constitute 3% of the population in the US. You're not profit generative enough for us to warrant that type of study. Instead, they just wanted to take our information to just study the things that were deemed marketable. So this is a problem when we're tying innovation specifically to these profit aims. And this is a question that we have to raise when we're talking increasingly about private industries partnering with public endeavors. And we have to think about more transparently these type of dynamics when we are trying to broker trust in communities. And we also have to understand the realities of the healthcare space for the communities in which we want to partner. Simply dropping genetic tests into our communities is not going to solve the health equity problem. If we don't have genetic counselors, if we don't have specialists that understand that of the 74 medically actionable genes in the recently expanded FACMG panel, that only a few of them have any information related to indigenous peoples. And then also, like, how are we going to ensure the accessibility of those tests, et cetera? This is something that we have to think about stepping outside of our comfort zones and asking the reality. And also understand that not everything is biologically mediated. That we have to understand that sometimes social dynamics are more prevalent in the space of health disparities than our aims. And that requires a lot of humility and a lot of reflection as well.
Thank you, Krystal. You raised the important point of partnerships, and this is obviously work that is really going to take the entire ecosystem. And many of us are trying to do what we can alone. But John and Ru, I want to bring you in on this aspect of the discussion. How do we partner better on this work with all of the stakeholders in health equity to achieve what we cannot on our own? And how do we do that in a responsible sort of way? Whoever of you want to take that first. And Ru, I know you have this really unique perspective from the pharma sector, so it really, if that works.
Test?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
First of all, I want to just say education. I'm not even answering your question, Raeka.
It's okay.
But I think there's just so much we just don't think about as scientists because we are in our own worlds. And it's the best intention, but we are very uneducated, I think, when it comes to, I'm speaking for myself, but, so these discussions, not being in kind of like the lunch hour, I mean, I've been to some conferences where there have been these discussions, but they're at the off time where not most people attend. I think just education, to me, I mean, we all want to learn. Scientists are very curious people, and so I think this is great, and there's just so much to learn. In terms of your question about partnership with industry, I mean, I haven't been in industry in close to 10 years now, but I do think efficiency, efficacy, these are things that are drivers. And sometimes you pick the easiest thing. It's not, nothing is easy, but I think using stem cells, thinking about some of these things, are harder, will take longer, and I think that's where the partnerships can make it go faster, because why reinvent the wheel? And you don't have this knowledge necessarily in smaller companies, or maybe even in the bigger companies. So that's why just the discussions we've had in the last few months with some of you, it's just opened up our minds. So I think partnerships can teach you things you don't know.
John, we've talked a lot about how to get funders on board. The technology is there. We have the capacity to do this. I know a lot of you wish to use more diverse lines, but they're simply just not available yet, and you yourself may not have the resources to make them. Even though funders agree this is important, it's been very difficult to find the right opportunities. You alluded to this with DiverStem, but please.
So for those of you who think that a white male tenured professor can't feel imposter syndrome, I'm here for you right now. Listen, I think we're torn, right? This is inconvenient. It's inconvenient to have to pay attention to people that you don't know, communities that you don't have any insights into because you're just not from that community. You have to engage with people who are going to be suspicious of you, and that's a pain in the ass because you know that you want to do good, but you're inadvertently stepping on all these landmines like Krystal was talking about. In the Bronx, I was giving a community outreach talk one day, and I was saying, we're excluding people who are not Northern European white from research. And this one older black woman put up her hand and she said, so let me get this straight, you want to target us? And target is a strong word, but yes, I want to make sure that our patient population in the Bronx is included. And she said, and then you'll have information you can use to kill us. And that is not something you can unwind in a discussion like that. And I had just read Harriet Washington's Medical Apartheid book. I recommend it, not that it's a fun book, it is absolutely awful in terms of what the medical community has done to the black community over decades. But I at least knew enough to say, that's why we need you to lead these studies. And that's the key. Up in the Bronx, if we don't have the trust of our community at Montefiore Hospital and they don't turn up, we lose money as a hospital. So it's actually pretty ingrained in the hospital system up there. So I was trying to find ways that we could have models for how to do this properly. And I came across Krystal and the other indigenous colleagues, and they were kind enough to invite me out for dinner one night. I'm going to tell the story. And it was great. I had dinner with them, and one of her colleagues told Irish jokes all night long. I had nothing to come back with. You can tell Bert I said that. But Krystal said, why don't you introduce yourself to the group at the outset? And I said, yeah, working up the Bronx. I really like the ideas that you have about how to foster trust and equity and all these things. And I'd like to implement them in the Bronx. And I looked around at the room and I said, I realize that's appropriation. So it was, that didn't go as well as I thought. Anyway, they were very kind and they bought me dinner. I think at the NIH level, the funder level, to get back to your point, there is a will, but it's not enough just yet. We need to have more investments. These are not cheap things to do because we have to have an extensive layer of engagement with and oversight by community participants. That looks like fluff on an NIH grant, but it's actually the bedrock.
Thank you, Raeka. I was itching to say something.
I saw you, please.
Partnerships, that is really the key to moving forward. And where do you invest? Who do you partner with? You partner with your community advocates. You partner with those trusted sources in communities. You partner with organizations who prioritize patient-centric care. There are so many opportunities out here. You partner with NYSCF and other research organizations. Here's what we're missing. There is this separation. Right now, we have moved leaps and bounds with getting the voice of the person with illness involved, right? But that's still not enough. We have to go beyond that. We are right now where we should have been years ago. So there is so much work for us to do. And when you speak about transparency, I think this is a very momentous time, and I will say this. As you are in your labs and doing your work and whatever projects you have, I just want you to realize that every cell that you're studying, every case that you have, it's attached to someone. It's attached to someone's history. It's attached to someone. And I think until we really humanize this space, and how do you humanize this space? You humanize this space by faces, by stories, by people who are coming to you with the perspectives that we need, not only to change medicine, but to change the entire healthcare ecosystem.
Thank you. I'd like to invite our audience to share any questions, experiences, examples. Please do raise your hands, and we have mic runners along. We would love to hear from you as well. while we wait for those to arise, I want to, all of you have basically made this point that research is something that we should be doing with our participants rather than to them. And that's a fundamental sort of frame shift. If you can talk about any other examples, good examples that you have seen of community engagement that we can learn from, that we can bring into our own actions, that this audience can bring in, please do share them. Krystal, I know you have a lot, not to put any pressure on you, but I know you have a lot. But anybody, please chime in the meantime.
With that invitation open, I'll say engagement's defined by the community, and the pace is defined by the community as well. And I hate to say it, but sometimes a lot of these, like operationalizing community engagement, falls in the legal contracting space. So there's a lot of like conflated language of what's ethical versus what's legal. And a lot of scientists have operated under the assumption, well, it's legal, I'm permitted to do so. And they equate that with acting ethically, which is unfortunate. And I mean, I'll just give a brief example. I think exemplifies this quite well. I work with a community that had a population-specific variant associated with an autoimmune condition. That paper has been embargoed for now 4+ years. And it has everything to do with the concerns related to intellectual property and also data sharing agreements and mandates and regulations, and also largely because the large partnered organization wants to retain ownership over any potential inventions. Like just because they, provided some resources, they feel like they own rights to future inventions, whereas the community believes it's our data without which you would have even generated these types of results. And whereas I normally wouldn't advocate for more lawyers, in this case, we actually need more community-based lawyers and advocates with quite a bit of knowledge related not only to the interface of tribal and federal state laws, but also intellectual property laws and also biomedical information. That's a lot of information and expertise levels to stack on one individual, but we need more of them. And increasingly in the policy space is all about these types of negotiations. So, scientists like to believe that we operate in this objective space that's pure of all these elements. Unfortunately, the reality of community engagement entails some of these elements.
Thank you. Sally.
Yeah, so first of all, this is an amazing panel, and I want to say thank you to all of you for teaching us, and certainly, we want to learn more, and we want to do this right. I just wanted to, you mentioned what about an example, something that I had learned of, a program that I learned of, and other people, you, Tracy, may know this better than me, but this is a relationship between people who work in tauopathies. Here, Ken Cossack is a colleague at UC Santa Barbara who has been working with families in Colombia now for 30 years. People who have rare mutations in genes that cause early onset dementia. And one of the things that they have done over this long period is to train people in those communities to do the science, to do the medicine, to do the treatment, to do the advising. In other words, they have brought the medical and scientific knowledge and training. They've created exchange programs with the US. And I felt that this was really inspirational from my point of view, because it was truly involving communities in the whole aspect of that work. And I think, and I hope there are other examples like that, and I'm sure there are things that they can still improve upon. For example, they have run into a roadblock in terms of making stem cell lines from individuals because they're still working through the implications of that. But I think that's good, right? Because they're still talking and they're still figuring it out. So I just want to thank you, and hopefully we'll learn more about those types of examples going on.
Thank you so much, Sally. That's really helpful to hear. We'll go here, then here, then here. Evan.
Me?
Yes, you.
Me? Oh.
You, Evan. Yes.
Sorry. Thank you for this. This is a wonderful panel, so thank you so much for everybody. One thing that I wanted to comment on was about partnerships, but also about leadership bodies. We're talking about funding organizations and PIs, the heads of departments. Who are they, right? And are they diverse individuals? And in that diversity, what are they actually capable of doing? Are they there to just fill a metric, right? So that we can tick off the boxes, or are they actually able to bring their whole authentic self to work? Is the culture amenable to them actually bringing themselves so that everybody on their panel, everybody on their leadership committee is able to learn from their experience to do the experiment right? You mentioned that you spoke with the indigenous population to actually inform the way that you built your experiment to be able to do it in a way that is culturally appropriate for that population. Are the people on your panels diverse? One, but are they able to actually be authentic so that you can learn from them to do something that's beneficial for the community that you're trying to serve?
Oh, we needed a whole day, Evan. There was a question.
It's me up here.
Yes. Hi, Becca.
Hi, so my name's Becca. I actually work in the clinical research department at NYSCF, so I'm actively involved in our recruitment for our biobank. And I actually just came back from the annual conference for clinical research up in Montreal, and there was an incredible clinical researcher, Dr. Quincy Birdsong, who gave a whole presentation on kind of what's next to come in clinical research and really what is our new call to action. And one of the things he really emphasized is unbiased and ethical inclusion and how we need to kind of think about recruitment from that approach. And so my question is really, do any of you have kind of thoughts on how we can acknowledge and reconcile where clinical research has really failed, but also how we can kind of move forward without perpetuating these stereotypes in how we recruit within our research studies and within our biobank as we take on this aim to diversify it?
It's a great question.
So first, I would say we individually, especially in these spaces, individually we have to assess our own biases. You cannot change the culture of anything until you change yourself. This moment reminds me of a quote from the late, great James Baldwin, and forgive me if I misquote, but you'll get the point. It says, he said, "Everything that is faced may not be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced." So first of all, we have to acknowledge our own biases, those things that make the things that really impede us from moving forward. And secondly, as far as clinical trials, again, the pillars come up. You have to have the courage to care. You have to really go out into the communities that you're serving. You have to be transparent. You have to be authentic. There has to be some autonomy. And as Krystal so eloquently stated again, there has to be an investment. People want to know that you're invested in them, that you're invested in the work, that you really have their good, in mind. So I think that we can't move forward until we start with those pillars.
Deepak. Thank you. Beautifully said.
So this is a fascinating discussion. Thank you. You brought up the point of education. So there are PhD students in the audience, and also I run an NIH training program, and sort of ticking the boxes. We have the two standard courses. There's an ethics course, and there's a responsible conduct of research course. So I'd be interested to know that as we're looking towards the future, as we develop a biomedical workforce which is more inclusive of all these issues which the panel is bringing up. How do we go about doing that? Just be interested to know and hear your views on it.
I wish we had a whole day for that one, but does anyone want to take a stab at a shorter answer?
I will talk about this very briefly in that for Indigenous communities, a lot of our resources have been stripped from our lands, and we really haven't had like a lot of means of creating our own economies to become self-sufficient, self-sustaining. One thing that is a great shift is understanding data as a resource and ensuring that that data is retained more locally and thinking more strategically and not exporting talent outside of our rural tribal communities to Bethesda every single summer or universities, and really retaining those training opportunities and those research capacity building opportunities more locally, because then we start thinking about structuring not only research capacity and then data infrastructure and policy, digital infrastructure. We start thinking about stacking all these great data tools, start thinking about building local STEM-based economies, and that's how you get longitudinal buy-in. When we interviewed tribal nation members, and this is pre-published data, they rated job and health opportunities higher than the actual benefit of the research to their families, because we have a saying, thinking 7 generations, like 7 generations forward, 7 generations back. So we're thinking more about like how is this research going to impact our communities several generations in the future.
Is this working? Yes. So I don't have anything as eloquent and knowledgeable as Krystal and Teresa said, but I was thinking when you said about training the next generation, I think when I think about the people we are hiring today who are kind of in their 20s and early 30s, social justice, and they've lived through this kind of in the last few years, they're hungry for this. It's not the training I got, but I think we have an opportunity to introduce these to my husband's a professor too, so I hear about this, the graduate programs, the training grants. So that's on the younger generation maybe, but for the rest of us, we are asked to take certain training, and when you talked about what's legal versus ethical, a lot of it's coming from the legal, right? Who works in the lab, do you know about the safety concerns, EHS? I mean, there are all these kind of things that we have to do on a yearly basis. I wonder if we can't introduce some of this as educational material to even in discussion forums, along with leadership training.
That would be really exciting to explore.
So it's just an idea that.
Absolutely, thank you, Ruth. We had one more comment from Tracy. Oh, I wish we had like so many more hours, but Tracy, please, we want to hear from you.
Well, I just wanted to say, that, playing after what you just said, I think I'm the generation that needs training, and panels like this are incredibly helpful. So in my lab, we're studying Alzheimer's disease pathogenesis and the different molecular roads that go from different genetic variants down to the cellular pathways that are altered, and we're ultra obsessed with that. And Teresa, when you said, picture the humans that you're working with, when we have we have lines from 50 different people, and we're just ultra obsessed with tying the genetic variants to the cell phenotypes. I'm literally blind. I mean, I did not meet the participants in the cohort, but after the end of the study, as part of the study, these are lines we generate, that NYSCF generated. This is with the Religious Order Study and Memory and Aging Project. We looked at the ethnicity of the individuals from those 50 people, and they were all European, white people. And I had kept saying, we're capturing the genetic diversity, we're capturing all the genetic variants, risk and resilience variants in this cohort. And of course, not even close. I wasn't even, not even close. Now, I'm happy to say, though, that we've now generated another 50 lines from the same cohorts that are not European. So we're trying to expand that collection. But even though I was excited about that before this panel started, now I'm like, but I also need education. Like, I also need to think about these individuals as people and their entire experience. So thank you very much for this panel.
I can only echo the gratitude that we're hearing all around. I'm so sorry. We'll have to move on. I don't want to take too much time away from Amanda's keynote. But I want to thank you all so much for such an inspiring discussion, for highlighting so many of the important aspects of research that we often do not talk or learn about. So thank you all for being here. If you'd like to work with us or partner with us on this, you know, we have to do this work together. Please reach out anytime. We want those partnerships and relationships. We've collated some resources that we'll share with the audience. We can all continue our education and learning and growth. So thank you so much.